Hi everyone and welcome to this new series which I'm starting specially for the exam going students, that is the FMG students who are targeting the December 12th exam. Now, we've already finished the crash course on the Unacademy platform, and I think what we need in these last few days is a quick revision of all the images that could probably come up in the exam, right? So what is the plan like? This particular series will be conducted on this YouTube channel, and I've kept a timing of 9 p.m. where we are going to discuss the most important images that could possibly come in your paper, and these images would be obviously covering both, that is path as well as microbiology. So first, today we are starting with pathology. These might be slightly lengthy sessions of approximately 60 minutes or over, but the entire plan is that first we should be able to finish all the path images that we get in the paper, including general path, systemic path, hematology, blood banking. Then we'll move on to microbiology and all the images that we could get in that. So it's going to be a very rapid revision where I don't want to touch upon the theoretical aspects because we've already done a very detailed theory course earlier. We've done a proper crash course as well. So I would only be focusing on the most important things, that is the identifying features of the images that you can get in the paper. So let's begin with today's class. Today we are going to talk about the pathology images, and I've tried to put up the general path images. Further, don't worry about the PDF and these images that I've put up over here, because this entire PDF with the labelings, I'll be putting it up on the Telegram group. Let's begin. So the first chapter, which all of you know, is cell injury, and the first image that you get in the paper is this black and white picture. Now remember, whenever you'll get a black and white picture in the exam, what are you dealing with? You're dealing with electron microscopy. And whenever on electron microscopy you see this round and round concentric appearance, that's the word that will be written. That's the exact finding that will be shown to you. Whenever you see this round and round concentric appearance, this is indicative of myelin figures. And in which injury do you see myelin figures? They are seen in both reversible as well as irreversible cell injury. So first picture, myelin figures on electron microscopy. Let's move on to the next set of images, and I think everyone is very well aware about this entire spectrum of images that we have over here, and these indicate images of necrosis. So let's start one by one. So I think I'll come back to this collage. First I'll zoom into each picture and then we'll come back to this collage in the end. So this is the collage that indicates the different types of necrosis to us. So what do we have? The very first necrosis that is shown over here, this happens to be in a solid organ, and the solid organ is kidney, and I'm telling you the identification that it is a slice that has been taken from the kidney, where I can see this particular area which has become a little yellowish and dead, and this is the area of coagulative necrosis, because I know that whenever I'm dealing with solid organs, I already know the kind of necrosis that happens in solid organs is coagulative necrosis. So now when I look at this wedge-shaped coagulative necrosis, when I look at it under the microscope, I see these pinkish outlines, right? Only the outlines of the cells are left. Only the outlines of the cells are left. Do you see any blue color nucleus inside it? Do you see any details inside it? No. So clearly the details are lost. Can I call such kind of cells as the ghost cells? That is, only the outlines of the cells are seen and the details are lost. These are ghost cells, and because you're seeing so many ghosts over here, it's basically become like a graveyard, right? So they call this the tombstone appearance. Tombstones, I hope you all have seen those tombstones that are kept on top of the grave. So because there are too many ghosts over here, they've called it a tombstone appearance. So picture number one, coagulative necrosis. Picture number two is the classical picture which has never been changed in so many years in the paper, and the exact same image comes all the time, and that is an image that is a slice taken from the brain. And in the brain I can very well see the normal areas of the brain, but then I see this part of the brain which is totally liquefied. It's from solid, it's changed into a liquefied mass. So I can very well call it liquefactive necrosis. Well, these days the examiner prefers calling it colliquative necrosis. That's another term that they've come up with, but I think it's pretty much the same, right? Colliquative, or whether I call it liquefactive, the word liquid is quite evident out here. So this is a case of liquefactive necrosis seen in the brain. Coming to the next, Here we have a classical image from the lung. Why do I call it the lung? I can see the shape of the lung and I can see air spaces. These are all spongy air spaces that are there. And within that air space, I see this whitish cheese-like appearance. I hope all of you remember that's the word that you give to it. It is the cheesy appearance that we notice. And this cheesy appearance is known as caseous necrosis. Well, let us move forward, and I think this is something I don't need to discuss too much because we all know this is probably a case, especially in our country. The first thing that I would think of with this caseous necrosis in the lung, I'll think of pulmonary tuberculosis. What else? If I ask you one little theory question over here, if not TB, then which other fungal infection can you think of? Histoplasma. So fungal infections can also show you caseous necrosis. So histoplasmosis can also be one of the differential diagnoses that you'll keep over here. Let's move on to the next picture where you see all yellow color fat. Everyone knows that yellow color is normal fat. There's nothing fancy about it. It's yellow in color. It's all fatty tissue. But then over here I see this area and then these few areas here and there which are coming out white. If I start seeing chalky white deposits, this means fat has died. This means fat has undergone necrosis. And I very well know that if fat undergoes necrosis, it will break into fatty acid. And my basic knowledge from school tells me that if fat breaks into fatty acid, it is going to attract calcium. That was the concept of saponification of fat, right? So this calcium will give me a chalky white appearance. So whenever we see chalky white deposits, it is indicative of calcium. Why has the calcium come? Because the fat has undergone necrosis. So when I see chalky white areas, it's a case of fat necrosis. Coming to the next, here we have a wonderfully, it's a beautiful picture. Everything is speaking for itself. You have a lumen out here. You've got lots of blood over here. So this is obviously a blood vessel. These are all red blood cells. And then apart from that, I see this band of pinkish material because that is the area of necrosis. And when I put two and two together, a blood vessel with necrosis, what comes to my mind is fibrinoid necrosis. And obviously fibrinoid necrosis is seen in a lot of organs and a lot of diseases. But with the blood vessel, one disease which has to come to my mind is polyarthritis nodosa. So just a quick recap of your theory. How does a clinical history of polyarthritis nodosa come to you in the exam? Usually you get a hepatitis B positive person and multiple, because we know polyarthritis nodosa, it's a medium vessel disorder. So a lot of medium vessels are involved in the body, but what is never involved or which organ is spared? So always remember, pulmonary system is never involved. So P is not for P is how we learn it, and that's a very famous question that you get in the paper. 30% of the cases are hepatitis B positive. Most of the medium vessels like kidney, like GIT, all of them will be affected, but pulmonary system will not be affected. And the necrosis that it shows us is the fibrinoid necrosis. Coming to the next, if I just show you the collage once again, I think it becomes very easy. The first one that you had over here, the ghost cells one, that was the coagulative necrosis. The one in the brain becomes liquefactive necrosis. The one in the lungs, the cheesy one, that becomes caseous necrosis. Then the fat one, obviously yellow color fat, and then chalky white areas, that becomes fat necrosis. And the blood vessel with the pinkish area, that becomes fibrinoid necrosis. So that's the entire collage which takes place of all the different necrosis images for you. Let's move further, and obviously the next one that you have is this biopsy that has been taken, and they'll tell you the site. So if I say that this is a liver biopsy that you're dealing with, so first and foremost, if you see that, yeah, I'm seeing all these liver cells very well, I can see them. Then I can also see some fatty areas, white areas, fat areas. So maybe this patient had fatty liver, probably. What else? What else is very evident? This cell over here. So now if I put away my attention from everything else and focus only on this cell, I see this cell is very, very pink in comparison to the others. This cell is extremely pink. And if I look at the nucleus is also very dark. So can I say that in this particular cell, there has been nuclear chromatin condensation, and that is the hallmark of what? The nuclear chromatin undergoing condensation is a feature, is the hallmark feature of apoptosis. So now think, put two and two together. Liver undergoing apoptosis, which bodies do you think am I talking about? We are talking about councilman bodies. And in which condition do I see councilman bodies? I see it in viral hepatitis. So, yes, moving on, necrosis apoptosis done, but a very important point that is left about it is this pattern that you see. First and foremost, what is this technique that I'm dealing with? That's the first question that you'll get in the exam. The technique that you're dealing with is gel electrophoresis. And how many patterns are shown to you? Pattern number A, pattern number B, and pattern number C. What are you trying to see in it? You're trying to see the DNA. So it's a DNA gel electrophoresis, and this is DNA of person A, person B, and person C. The DNA of person A is totally normal because there is no DNA that is breaking. All the DNA is nice and compact. But the DNA of person B and C, if you see, it's breaking and moving till the end. Here also moving till the end. But there's a difference. Over here, it's breaking in steps. So I call this the step ladder pattern. And usually the step ladder pattern is seen in apoptosis. Why do we see it in apoptosis? Why is it that the DNA is broken in these exact same step-like manner? Because there's a special enzyme called endonuclease. That endonuclease breaks the DNA exactly in the same number of base pairs. So if this is the entire DNA, it will be broken after every 180 base pairs, then again after 180 base pairs, then again after 180 base pairs. So after every 180 base pairs, it's broken. So that is the reason that you get that step ladder appearance in apoptosis. Whereas in necrosis, we get a smearing appearance. See, the entire DNA seems as if it has been smeared. So this is the smearing appearance that you notice. However, all of these are non-specific. If you get a question that can you see step ladder pattern in necrosis as well? Yes, you can. So there's a very famous question that's going around on all the social media platforms which students keep sending to me as their doubt. The question says, is step ladder seen in apoptosis, necrosis, or both? The right answer is both, because see, it's more commonly seen in apoptosis undoubtedly, but can it be seen in necrosis also? Yes. So if you have an option of both, please go in for both. In case you have to select the one best answer, then you go in for apoptosis. Okay, having said that, now let's deal with a certain number of pigments and stains that you have. So the first one that you have over here is the very classical one. This is a section taken from the skin, and in the skin you can see this brownish pigment which gives us the color of the skin. This brownish pigment is melanin. And what is the most famous stain for melanin is M for M. Melanin stains positive for Mason Fontana. So a lot of Masons go around in pathology. Don't get confused. Which Mason over here? Melanin is a pigment. Melanin gives you a tan, right? So Mason Fontana is the pigment for melanin, and you can see it's got a jet black color. With Mason Fontana, you get a nice jet black color out here. Okay, coming to the next, there's another pigment which goes by the name of hemosiderin, and I think the word of the pigment tells you that it's sidrin, means it's very, very rich in iron. And anything that's rich in iron will stain positive for a stain that goes by the name of pearl stain. So there are two names. Either you can call it pearl stain, and the color that it gives is a blue color. So the other name of the stain has been put as Prussian blue stain. So you can see what color will hemosiderin come, or anything that has iron is going to come blue in color because you've used pearls or Prussian blue. Coming to the next pigment, which is classically identified by two things. Firstly, you will always get a history of a senile age group. So usually in the MCI exam, the most favorite history that they have is 83 years. For some odd reason, they really like giving the same age over and over again. So you'll always get a history of somewhere about an elderly male or a female. So that's the first thing, because the pigment that I'm talking about is a senile old age pigment known as lipofuscin. And what's the second catch point other than old age? You will see that this pigment will always be around the nucleus. That is how they've mentioned. The brown color will be around the nucleus. So if they have an old man or a woman with a perinuclear pigment, you should know you're dealing with lipofuscin. Coming to the next. If I ask you what are the special stains for lipofuscin, there's a very easy way of learning it. I hope you all remember from the crash course that we did. Lipo will remind you of all the fat stains. So yes, this is going to be positive for all the fatty stains, which I'll tell you in exactly a minute. And fuscin will remind you of acid fast. Fast. What is that stain which makes something acid fast? That is Zn stain. So please remember, lipofuscin is lipo and fast, lipid and Zn stain positive. So now talking about fatty stains, why not finish off the fatty stains that we have otherwise also? What are the stains like? For example, you get a case of fatty liver. You get a case of fatty liver and they ask you that, how will you prove that it's fatty liver? What are the stains that you're going to use? I'll say for fat, we have to know two stains. One is known as oil red O. So no points for guessing that what will be the color of fat. The color of fat will be red. And the other one is Sudan black B. And again, no points for guessing that the fat will be stained black in color. So remember, oil red O and Sudan black B are stains for lipid that you need to know. The next image that we have is one of the most famous images in the entire subject. It's a blue color body, again going round and round. It's very famous for its concentric lamellations, and that's a Samoma body. Primarily, what is it made up of? Samoma bodies are made up of calcium. And I think it will not be right on my part if I move ahead without discussing the main causes that come in the MCI exam for the Samoma bodies. I cannot miss this theory, although it is an image revision. So first, it is seen in all the papillary tumors and papillary cancers of the body, be it thyroid or endometrium or ovary. Every papillary cancer will have this. Second, which ovarian tumors are going to show you the same? Serous ovarian tumors shall show me the same. Then one brain tumor is known for having Samoma bodies, and that is meningioma. And one lung tumor is known for having Samoma bodies, and that is mesothelioma. So papillary, serous, meningioma, mesothelioma. All of these show me the presence of these round and round bodies, that is Samoma bodies, and it is nothing but calcium. Well, for calcium, we get another question. What is this organ? That's the first thing that you need to know. So you'll say a lot of red blood cells. So this is definitely a blood vessel. This is definitely a blood vessel, and something in the tunica media. This time you're seeing calcium in the tunica media. So can we call it Monckeberg sclerosis? I think that's a very famous question again that we have in path and medicine both. There's something called Monckeberg sclerosis, and that has a better name actually. And that better name is known as calcific, because guys, there is blue color calcium. Medial, because where is that calcium seen? That calcium is seen here in the tunica media. And the third word is degeneration. This is known as calcific medial degeneration because it's a degenerative old age kind of a phenomena where in the tunica media of the blood vessel you see calcium. So again, that's another very important thing that they ask you in the exam. Let's move forward and go on to the next picture, because if I ask you, having spoken so much about calcium, if you have to know the stains, what stain of calcium gives it a black color? So Kosa Kala, that is how we remembered. Von Kosa gives it a black color. Von Kosa is going to give calcium a black color, and what is going to give calcium a red color? Again, the name tells us alizarin red S is going to give calcium a red color. So red color with alizarin red S and black color with Kosa Kala. So Von Kosa gives it a black color. With this, we finish all the different types of pigments and stains and whatever pertinent to that is needed. Now let's switch the chapter. Like I said, we are not doing one chapter a day because our exam is quite nearby. So we have to move in and go ahead with certain, increased number of chapters. So we'll move on to the next one. And the next picture that we have is this in front of you. So this is obviously from the next chapter, that is inflammation, and over here you see there's a huge cell out here, and that huge cell has somewhere eaten up a smaller cell over here. This process is known as emperipolesis. So this picture that you see out here is a picture of emperipolesis, where a big cell has eaten a small cell. But then you will say that is exactly what happens in phagocytosis also. One cell eats up another cell, but after eating it in phagocytosis, if this would have been phagocytosis, this cell would have been killed also. But in emperipolesis, there is no killing. It's just cell within cell. Will this cell be eaten up? Yes, but will it be killed? No. So please remember, emperipolesis just stands for cell within cell appearance. But remember, no one's going to get killed, and that is emperipolesis. So you'll ask me, where do you see emperipolesis? Guys, for the FMG exam, obviously for the NEET exam, this is much more needed in advance, and I've covered it under the images decoded sessions. But for the FMG students, please remember, there's one disease that you should know, and that is autoimmune hepatitis. Autoimmune hepatitis shows you emperipolesis, and I think that should do this trick for you. But for the other students, if you want to know where all can we see emperipolesis, you can see it in a mnemonic called MARK. That is multiple sclerosis, myelodysplastic syndrome, autoimmune hepatitis, Rosai-Dorfman disease, and CLL. But like I said, for the FMG students, autoimmune hepatitis is important. Why? Because this is a previous year question, so obviously we cannot ignore it. That shows you emperipolesis. Let's move on to the next one, an image that has come directly out of Robbins, and it goes by the name of NETs. Firstly, what is NETs? I think everyone knows. The N over here tells you everything about it. It is to do with neutrophils. Whatever is happening over here is going to be E for extracellular, and the third thing, the T and S, will stand for traps. So this is going to be a case of neutrophil extracellular traps. Now, what do I see? First, image number 1, then image number 2. In image number 1, they've used a kind of a fluorescent, and then you can say it's a kind of an electron microscope, but they've used colored this time. And over here, if you can see very carefully, this is a cell, this is a cell. So if I look very carefully, I see orange color. Orange color has been given to the nucleus. And then if I look further, a green color has been given to the cytoplasm. That's the color coding which I can gather. So see, orange color has been given to the nucleus and green color has been given to the cytoplasm. So over here everything seems pretty much fine. But when I go here, the green color cytoplasm is as it is, but do you see the orange nucleus inside? No. The nucleus has all gone out. The nucleus has gone out. It's making a trap over here. So see, the neutrophil has sent its nucleus where? The nucleus has been sent outside, extracellular. Why? It's gone to make a trap so that whatever bacteria, virus, parasite, fungus, whatever is here, a trap is made around it and killed. So is this a kind of a killing process? Yes. This is a killing process, but the questions that they extremely are fond of is where is this killing occurring? So please remember, this killing occurs outside the cells. So this happens to be an extracellular process of killing. And which are the cells which are killing it? The cells are neutrophils. That is why you call it NETs. Well, having said this, now let's move on to the next set of images in inflammation. And I think everyone knows that one of the most important topics that we have in inflammations is granulomas. And before I start with granulomas, you get a lot of theory questions also, which we've covered under our theory course. But I think one question that is always troubling everyone is about a caseating granuloma versus a non-caseating granuloma, which basically means that is caseous necrosis seen or is it not seen? So first and foremost, both caseating and non-caseating granulomas are seen in TB and they are seen in sarcoidosis. So that's one question which everyone asks. TB shows which one, sarcoidosis shows which one. So let me tell you, TB can show both. Sarcoidosis can also show both. But when it comes to finding the commoner one, TB shows caseous necrosis more commonly and sarcoidosis shows non-caseating more commonly. So if you get a question, TB shows caseating, non-caseating or both, you will select both. But if you have to select the commoner one, it's caseating. Same for sarcoidosis, the best answer is both. But if you have to select the commoner one, non-caseating. Well, having spoken about sarcoidosis, why not finish off the two bodies that you see in sarcoidosis over here? So sarcoidosis shows you this one body which looks like a star and one blue color body. First and foremost, there's a huge cell out here which I can call as a giant cell. And same way, there's a huge cell out here which again I'm going to call as a giant cell. So whatever I'm seeing in sarcoidosis, number one, be it the star-shaped body, that is asteroid body, where is it? Inside the cell or outside the cell? The star-shaped body, asteroid body is inside the cell. The second one also is going to be inside the cell, and the second one is known as a Schaumann body. So these are the two bodies, guys, that are all-time favorite questions of the examiner: asteroid body and Schaumann body. And further in theory, please remember that Schaumann bodies are made up of calcium. Schaumann bodies, or this blue and blue color body, this looks somewhat like a Samoma body, right? This blue color concentric thing, and that is something that you see in with calcium deposition. So sarcoidosis shows you these two bodies, again something which is very important for the exam. And both of these are inside the giant cells. Now that we are talking about asteroid body, why not we talk about the other places where you can see asteroid body. So that is something which I would want all the students to correlate, that when you're talking about path and micro, asteroid bodies are seen in two places. See, how have I learnt it? Asteroid reminds me of a star. So the star-shaped body is seen in the two S's. One is going to be sarcoidosis, which we've just spoken about right now, and the other is going to be a fungal infection that is known as Sporothrix shenki or sporotrichosis, Sporothrix shenki, that also shows you this star-shaped body. So remember, S for star or asteroid seen in sarcoidosis and seen in Sporothrix shenki. Well guys, let's move ahead. Now that we're talking about granulomas, let's do a complete recall of all the different types of giant cells that we can see in a granuloma. The first one is known as the Langerhans giant cell, and let me tell you once again, it is not a Langerhans, because that's one of the most frequent mistakes that students do. It's not Langerhans at all, it is Langhans. Because what is Langerhans? Langerhans is an antigen presenting cell that is present in the skin. It's an APC of the skin, so that is not what I'm talking about over here. I'm talking about a Langerhans giant cell which you see in tuberculosis. And how do you identify it? I identify it by the arrangement of the nuclei. So if I look at this cell over here, I will see that the nuclei are arranged in a horseshoe manner. And yes, if I'm seeing this, this is the Langerhans giant cell of tuberculosis. Let's move forward. The second one that I have is known as the Touton giant cell. And where do I see it? In lipid-related disorders, xanthoma. How do I identify this one? If this is a giant cell out here that you're seeing, you can very well appreciate how are the nuclei arranged. They are arranged in a round manner. Same way over here, same way over here. They are all arranged in a round manner, and that is known as a wreath-like arrangement. If you look at the cytoplasm around it, it's all whitish and foamy. It's a vacuolated cytoplasm. Why? Because I just told you this is a fatty disorder. This is a lipidaceous disorder. So the cytoplasm will have all the fat. So remember, for a Touton giant cell, you'll have wreath-like arrangement, and then you're going to have those fatty vacuolated cytoplasm. Let's move ahead. Coming to the third and the easiest one, which we call as foreign body giant cell. Foreign body, like for example, some suture has been applied or some glove powder, that is talc, has entered. So when any of this happens, the kind of giant cell that your body makes in response is a foreign body giant cell. And how are the nuclei arranged? They are arranged anywhere and everywhere. This is a total haphazard arrangement of nuclei. So when I see haphazard, it's a foreign body giant cell. Coming to the fourth one, a very famous question: what do you see in measles infection? In measles, you see the Warthin-Finkelday giant cells. So when I looked at it for the very first time, I thought everything was haphazard here and there, and I thought this was just like a foreign body giant cell. See, that's also all haphazard nuclei. This is also all haphazard nuclei. But when I looked closely, every nucleus has a pink color dot. Every nucleus has a pink color dot. So there are intranuclear inclusions. Similarly, there are inclusions in the cytoplasm as well. So when I saw this giant cell clearly, I saw intranuclear and intracytoplasmic inclusions, which made me realize that there is some viral infection that is going on that is creating all these inclusions. So remember, measles shows you Warthin-Finkelday giant cells which will have inclusions. Obviously, we are discussing path, but a little bit of micro won't harm anyone. So which are the two infections which can show me both intranuclear and intracytoplasmic inclusions? If they ask you this kind of a question, please remember there are two infections. One of them you've seen right now, and that is measles, and the other one is cytomegalovirus. CMV also shows you both intranuclear and intracytoplasmic inclusions. Let's move ahead. Coming back to my giant cell, this was Warthin-Finkelday giant cell seen in measles. Now we go to the fifth and the most famous one, the tumor giant cell. And the tumor that I'm talking about over here is the all-time favorite of every student, and that is Hodgkin's lymphoma. When I'm saying Hodgkin's lymphoma, you know the cells that I'm talking about are the Reed-Sternberg cells. It's a big cell, giant cell. How many nuclei does it have? It has one nucleus and then a second nucleus. So they are identical copies. They are mirror image nuclei. But what's very, very prominent is the nucleoli inside it. The nucleoli is like eyes. That is the reason that we call it owl-eye appearance. Now, one small homework for all of you. In pathology, there are total of 3 owl eyes, which you need to know. 3. One owl eye I've told you is Reed-Sternberg cell. The second owl eye, most of you will be able to answer, which is some virus, which I'm sure all of you know. But I also want you to answer the third owl eye. I want all of you to comment below, and then I'll obviously be giving you the right answer. So owl eye seen in 3 places. One of them is RS cells, waiting for the other 2 answers. Okay, having said that, this was a quick recap of all the giant cells. Now, there are some granulomas also that need our attention, and those are all different shaped granulomas. And this granuloma, I think, is one of the most famous ones because this has a very nice star shape appearance. So they tend to call it a stellate granuloma, and stellate granuloma is seen in cat scratch disease and lymphogranuloma venereum. I hope everyone remembers cat scratch disease is caused by Bartonella henselae and lymphogranuloma venereum is caused by chlamydia. So these two infections can show me a stellate or a star granuloma. Let's talk about another infection. I've written something called a Dirk granuloma. Dirk granuloma is caused by which infection? It is seen in a case of cerebral malaria. Dirk granuloma is seen in a case of cerebral malaria. And if I'm saying cerebral malaria, then the Plasmodium species that I'm talking about is falciparum. So what kind of granuloma? Dirk granuloma, where you see these, most of them are, within the blood vessels. And you see these dots that are there inside it. These are all rings of Plasmodium falciparum, rings or trophozoites. These are all rings or trophozoites of Plasmodium falciparum, and this is the Dirk granuloma, which I see in 2 colors. One is the usual pink and blue, so I call that the HNE slide. The other one that I have over here is the field stain. So that's a very important stain that you have to remember when you want to stain a Dirk granuloma. That could be a future exam question also. Coming to the next one, the different granuloma, which is again a very, very famous one, where I see that, okay, there's a classical, I think no one can go wrong in this. This is a donut shaped granuloma, and the way you make a donut is exactly the way you make a Q out of it. So that's how we've learnt it. How do you see, or where do you see a donut granuloma? You see it in Q fever. And I hope you know Q fever is caused by which infection? It is caused by Coxiella. So a lot of infections and different granulomas. See, let's do a recap. When I have star-shaped, it is cat scratch and LGV. When we have Dirk granuloma, cerebral malaria, it is Plasmodium falciparum. When we have a donut granuloma, it is Q fever. Let's move ahead. There's one more set of images that you need to know before we end this chapter, and that is the very, one of the most, I would say, 10-star questions. Even in your theory, I told you that this is a topic which you cannot afford to leave before the exam. You have to revise it, the stages of wound healing, the different questions that have been asked, all of which we've studied in our theory section. But certainly what we have to revise over here is going to be the difference between a keloid and a hypertrophic scar. So first and foremost, keloid that I see over here, for example, this patient underwent an ear piercing, a trauma, ear piercing, and then developed this excessive scar. So I can clearly see that the keloid tends to cross the margins. Whatever margins are there of the wound, see, ear piercing was few and it has totally crossed all the margins. Whereas a hypertrophic scar is well within the margins. Wherever the wound has been inflicted, it is well within the margins. Keloid versus hypertrophic scar. Well, since it's such a favorite topic of the examiner, I have to quickly revise the two questions that have been asked on keloid. First and foremost, they ask you the most common site of keloid, and the answer to that question is sternum. Second, they ask you the treatment of keloid, and it is not, the first line treatment is not excision. The first line of treatment is going to be intralesional injection. The first line of treatment is going to be intralesional injection of a steroid. And I think everyone knows that the most common steroid that is used is triamcinolone, a very famous question in surgery as well. Triamcinolone injection is what is used. It's a steroid. If you inject it within the keloid, the size tends to shrink. Okay, having said that, well, your images of inflammation and cell injury both are over, and now we can also, I think today we can also go ahead and discuss the images of genetics. So a couple of images coming up our way, but the first one and the most important one that we have is that of a karyotype. Well, this is nothing fancy. This is a normal karyotype. And what are the questions that they can possibly ask me out of this? First, they'll ask you that the way the karyotype, the chromosomes have been arranged. What is the order in which they've been arranged? So please remember, they are arranged in the decreasing order of length. Next question that they ask you, which out of these is the shortest chromosome? So please remember, the shortest chromosome is number 21. Next, they ask you, this chromosome arrangement has been done in which phase of the cell cycle? So please remember, the most common arrest that they do is a metaphase arrest. And the next question that they ask you, what is the most common stain that you use in a karyotype? And the most common stain is G banding. G stands for Giemsa stain. So the most common stain that I have used out here is a Giemsa stain. So do I need any, isn't Giemsa a very routine kind of a stain? Do I need any fancy microscope for it? No. I'll view it under a regular light microscope. So I don't need any fancy stuff for Giemsa staining. I'll view it under a light microscope. What phase? Repeating again, metaphase. Shortest chromosome 21. What is the stain that I've used most commonly? The Giemsa stain. And which microscope will I use for it? I'll use a light microscope. Having said that, if on the other hand I end up seeing my karyotype has become so fluorescent and fancy, this means I've used some fancy staining, some fancy microscope, and that is known as Q banding. Please remember, Q stands for which stain? It stands for quinacridine stain. So the way the word goes, queen. Now the queen will not settle for a light microscope. The queen will definitely need something fancy. So quinacridine stain is a kind of a fluorescent stain. It needs a fluorescent microscope. That is why you can see all the chromosomes over here. They've got a lot of fluorescence, right? So repeating for all of you, quinacridine banding needs, it sounds like a queen. So it needs something fancy, and that is fluorescent microscopy. Let's do some variations. I think that's very important. So the first variation, I think everyone would be able to pick up very easily. You look at a karyotype and you just have to identify where is the anomaly happening. So here when I look at this karyotype, 2X chromosomes, this is a female, but then over here you have trisomy 21. So this is a case of Down syndrome. The next one that I have over here, I can very well see there's a trisomy 13. Trisomy 13 definitely stands for Pettau syndrome. The next one as well, you see there's an extra chromosome on chromosome 18. I think everyone knows the mnemonic E for 18, E for Edwards syndrome. Coming to the next. When I look at the numbers, all of them are in pairs and everything seems fine. But when I come to the sex chromosomes, that is the X and the Y, I see a Y chromosome. One Y chromosome clearly tells me it's a male. So if male has one Y chromosome, he should have another one X chromosome. But instead of one X chromosome, there are two X chromosomes present. So in a male patient, I'm having an extra X, and that is a classical case of Klinefelter. This is a Klinefelter syndrome. Coming to the next and the last one is this. At the first look, when I saw all the numbers, everything seemed to be perfect. And two X chromosomes, no Y chromosomes, so means this was 46XX, and I gave a diagnosis that this is just a normal female. But then I saw that the examiner had put an arrow on the fifth chromosome to make me realize something, that one arm of chromosome C, every chromosome, I hope everyone remembers, has a short arm and a long arm. P is the short arm, Q is the long arm. So in this aspect, there was a P arm and there's a Q arm. In this chromosome number 5, there's a long arm which is perfect, but a part of the short arm has gone missing. See, a part of the short arm has gone missing. So what is this? The entire short arm is not missing. A part of it is missing. So you call this partial deletion 5P. Partial deletion 5P is known as Cry-do-chat syndrome, cat cry. The child has the cry of a cat. Cry-do-chat syndrome is partial deletion 5P. So in the exam, the examiner gives you an arrow pointing towards somewhere 5 chromosome. Start thinking about this disorder. Well, this was all about karyotype. What are the next set of images that you can get? I think what everyone has heard of is a very famous concept of Loyonization. Loyon's hypothesis or Loyonization, and this is something which is a normal process, right? It is totally normal, and this is seen in every female. That's why I've written 46XX. It's seen in every female, whereby it's decided that one X chromosome will be kept active all throughout life, and one X chromosome is going to be made inactive all throughout life. Now, having said that, the chromosome X which is being made inactive, that inactive X chromosome is known as a Barr body. So for example, I have taken a buccal mucosa scraping, a buccal mucosa sample from a male and a female. When I saw the nucleus of the male cells, I just saw one nucleus, that's it. But when I saw the nucleus of a female cell, I saw that this is the nucleus and there's an additional blue color dot inside it. And what was that blue color dot? Because every female has a Barr body. That is nothing but the inactive X chromosome, the chromosome X which has been made inactive for life, that is present as a Barr body. So if you get a buccal mucosa sample, how will the Barr body look? It will look like this blue color dot in a female. Versus if you get a blood smear. If you get a blood smear, and I think everyone knows what is this cell with lobes, this cell is a neutrophil. In a neutrophil, do you see something different? This is a lobe, this is a lobe, these are lobes, but then I see something projecting out of it. In a neutrophil, when you start seeing the drumstick appearance, this drumstick is known as Davidson body, D for D. Davidson body looks like a drumstick. It looks like a drumstick, and you'll ask me, what is it? I'll say this is exactly the same inactivated X chromosome. This is the same inactivated X chromosome. So you'll ask me, what's the difference between this Davidson body and the Barr body? And there's no difference. Barr body is also the inactivated X chromosome. Davidson body is also the inactivated X chromosome. Only the sampling is different. For Davidson body, which is the drumstick, I've taken a blood sample and I'm looking at it as a neutrophil. In the Barr body, I've taken a buccal mucosa sample and I'm seeing it over there. So the sample taken from the patient is different, but essentially a Barr body and a Davidson body mean the same, and that is the inactive X chromosome. Well, that's the concept of Loyonization, and the most expected question is that this inactivation occurs at which day of the embryo. So please remember, it occurs at day 5.5 of the embryo. It occurs as day 5.5 of the embryo. That's a theory question that you get. Moving forward, what are the other clinical images that you can get in genetics from your syndromes point of view? So I think a very famous syndrome which everyone knows undoubtedly is trisomy 21, that is Down syndrome. In Down syndrome, we see that the chin of the child is very small and the tongue is usually protruding out because the child has a very big tongue. There's something called macroglossia that happens in these children. Macroglossia makes the tongue protrude. A small chin makes it protrude further. So that is the reason that these children usually tend to have an open mouth. Because of these two reasons, they have an open mouth. Further, if you look at the overall appearance, as they grow up, you'll see they have something known as mongoloid faces. What is mongoloid faces? Their eyes will have this obliqueness towards the medial aspect. So there's oblique palpebral fissures. And then you'll see that their nose will have a flat appearance. Why is there a flat nasal bridge? Because their nasal bone is not developed properly. There is nasal bone hypoplasia. Please remember, nasal bone hypoplasia with oblique palpebral fissures, that is very important for mongoloid faces. And when you zoom into the eyes of these patients, it's an ophthal question. In the eyes of the Down syndrome baby patients or Down syndrome patients in general, you see something called brushfield spots. Please remember, brushfield spots are seen in which part of the eye? Brushfield spots are all these spots that you're seeing over here. They are seen in the iris of the eye. So this is another very important question. So if I look at the overall facial profile, I see number one, mongoloid faces. Second, as their mouth is open because the small chin and because of the macroglossia. Their eyes show me brushfield spots in which part of the eye? In the iris of the eye. If I look at their hands and fingers, I see a very important finding, that is the simian crease. And that means that a normal child or a normal individual has two palmar creases, whereas these people tend to have a single palmar crease, as you can see over here. So this single palmar crease is known as the simian crease. Versus if you also look at their little fingers, see, all the fingers have two creases. All the fingers will have two creases, but their little finger, that has a single crease. So I see a single crease here and I see a single crease here, again a finding seen in Downs. So single palmar crease and single crease on the little finger. Versus now let's move on to the toes. There's a very famous finding in the toe as well, that is known as sandal toe, and it's like the child is wearing a slipper or the child is wearing a sandal. And what does that mean? So if you see the great toe versus the rest of the toes, there's a gap between the great toe and the rest of it. Same here, there's a gap between the great toe and the rest of the toes. And that's as if the child is wearing a sandal. So you call it a sandal toe. All of these were findings which are very, very important in a case of Downs. What about the others? What about a case of, say, Edwards syndrome? I hope you all remember E for Edward, E for 18. So trisomy 18 is Edwards syndrome, and this is a classical profile of a child with Edwards. Over here, if you start from the topmost, the back side of the head is very prominent. The occipital region is very, very prominent. So when you look at it radiologically, when the mother is pregnant and if her baby has Edward, then the radiologist can see something known as a strawberry skull. So if they ask you, where do you see a strawberry skull? You'll say, because the occiput is so prominent, it looks like a strawberry. The chin is small and the head is prominent on the back. So here you have something known as a strawberry skull that can be seen radiologically on an ultrasound also. So number one, prominent occiput. If you look at the fingers of this child, the fingers are overlapping. If you look at the kidney, I see a horseshoe kidney, congenital anomaly. I can see horseshoe kidney that is forming over here. And if you look at the feet, it's a very classical finding. There's a convexity, as if there's a rocking chair that you're dealing with. There's a convexity, and that is known as rocker bottom feet. So prominent occiput, overlapping fingers, horseshoe kidney, rocker bottom feet, Edwards syndrome. Rocker bottom feet is seen in both Edward as well as Pettau syndrome. So what is Pettau syndrome? Edward, you've studied everything. What is Pettau? Pettau is trisomy 13. So we should also study what all happens in trisomy 13. Trisomy 13 or Pettau syndrome, number one, you've done, it can show me the same rocker bottom feet. But what else can it show me? So please remember, P for Pettau, P for polydactyly. They can show you extra digits. P for petal, P for palate and lip. It can show you cleft lip that you can see over here. So cleft lip and cleft palate. And apart from that, it can show you an eye anomaly. Can you see over here in the eyes, it looks as if there's a keyhole defect? I think everyone has studied very well in ophthalmology that a keyhole defect in the eye is known as colobomas. So yes, please remember P for petal, P for polydactyly, P for palate, and colobomas are seen in a case of trisomy 13. Well, guys, moving forward, what is the next thing that you have to know is this technique. The last thing in genetics is this another technique which they have asked you earlier in the FMG exam. And this technique came as a theoretical question. So since it's come as a theoretical question earlier, I'm putting it up as an image-based question now. And what is it? It is fish. First and foremost, it is fluorescent in situ hybridization. That's the full form that they can ask you over here. Fluorescent in situ hybridization, that makes it fish. So there are 2-3 questions. What was the question that came in your paper? In your paper, you had got a question that fluorescent in situ hybridization is done for which kind of disorders? For which disorder detection will you do it? So the answer to that question was whenever you want to check out on chromosomal disorders. And I'll tell you how. So there's a color coding, and don't worry about the color coding because the examiner will be giving you a color coding in the exam. So the examiner has told me that the red color goes to chromosome 21 and the green color goes to chromosome 13. So this is a 2-color coding which is already given. I just need to do a simple mathematics in the exam. So 2 for green, 1 signal, 1 signal. The green is doing well. Chromosome 13 is doing well. For red, I can see 3 signals, so there's a problem with red. 3 signals means I'm dealing with a case of trisomy 21, means I'm dealing with a case of Down syndrome. So the only change that can happen with fish is that earlier you had got that, yeah, it is used for the diagnosis of chromosomal disorders, and now they can ask you the image-based question and how can you actually diagnose is what they can put it up as. So guys, with that, almost all the images of genetics are done except for this one last image, which I think is a very, very, very famous question. And that is the crumpled tissue paper appearance. So please remember, crumpled tissue paper appearance obviously comes as a theoretical question also. Crumpled tissue paper appearance is seen in Gaucher's disease or Gaucher's cell. And if I look at this cell, it's actually a macrophage. It's a macrophage, and you can see that this is the blue color nucleus. Can you see these white lines inside it, as if you've wrinkled a paper, crushed a paper or a tissue paper, you've just crumpled it. So all those wrinkled lines that come, that's exactly how you identify this cell. So crumpled tissue paper appearance is seen in Gaucher's disease or Gaucher's cell, and I hope everyone remembers that Gaucher's cell or Gaucher's disease is G for G, glucocerebrosidase deficiency. So it is glucocerebrosidase deficiency. Well, having said that, this is one of the all-time favorite filler questions. Whenever they're falling short of a question, I think this is something that definitely comes up. Well, now let's move on to the next chapter, because the next chapter does not have too many images. It's got a lot of theory to deal with, but images are very few, and that's this. So if I ask you that this is something that I've done using Congo red stain, I think everyone has identified that I've moved on to immunity, and the material that I'm talking about is amyloid. Congo red stain, what is the use of this stain? The use of this stain is that it helps in staining amyloid. Next, what is the color that you can see over here? This color that you can see, this is said to be apple green birefringence. That's a very famous word that comes in the exam. Apple green birefringence is seen with amyloid on which type of stain? It is Congo red stain. But this is not the usual microscopy. Does it appear so? No. So they ask you that which microscope has been used over here. So the microscope that has been used over here is a polarizing microscope. That's again an all-time favorite slide that I'm going to show you. Repeating the questions and no one falters in it. Congo red stain is used for staining amyloid. The microscope that I'll use will be a polarizing microscope, and the color that I'm going to get is going to be an apple green birefringence. Well, having said that, what are the other images that can come in immunity? Like I said, immunity doesn't have too many images, but something which again medicine and path together do get a lot of questions is immunofluorescence. You can see some fluorescent things over here. So they ask you, what are the different immunofluorescent patterns when you want to detect ANA? I hope everyone remembers this antibody from SLE, anti-nuclear antibody. When I talk about anti-nuclear antibody, what is the method by which I detect it? It is known as immunofluorescence. You can see that the different patterns of immunofluorescence are there, and there's a very simple way of learning this pattern, and that goes by the mnemonic happens. So please remember the mnemonic happens. So I'll decode everything. H for, do you see the entire nucleus is nicely green? So I call it the homogeneous pattern. This is known as homogeneous pattern. The next one, only the periphery or the rim is coming out to be more green. So we call it the peripheral or the rim pattern. The peripheral or the rim pattern. In the third one, the entire nucleus is not visible. Only a dot in the nucleus is visible. So this is known as nucleolar pattern. And in the last one, it's all, some places it's fluorescent, some places it's not. Same here, same here. So this is said to be the speckled pattern. And let me tell you, the speckled pattern is the most common pattern that we notice. So repeating for all of you, if I show you an unlabeled picture, please remember the first one is the homogeneous. The second one is the peripheral or the rim. The third one is a simple dot, nucleolar, and the fourth one is speckled, which is the most common. These are all the different patterns of anti-nuclear antibody that you can see in autoimmune disorders. Guys, with that, most of your general path images are done for the day. Now, you know this is an ongoing series, so this will be uploaded on a daily basis between 9 and 9:30 on the Unacademy YouTube channel. And first, we'll be covering all the images of path. So obviously from tomorrow, we'll be starting off with a couple of systemic path images. And thereafter, finishing path with systemic, hemat and blood banking, we'll be moving on to micro. And I think closer to the exam, you'll get to revise all the culture media and the bacteria and viruses. That will be a good rapid revision. Any other feedback that you have, anything else that you want me to include or not include, you can always let me know. Write it down in the comments below, and yes, I'll take care of it. Also, for those who joined in late and who do not know about what crash course was going on, it is still available on the platform. There was a free crash course that was conducted for path and for micro for the FMG students who are targeting this very December 2021 exam. So in case you've joined us late, in case you are struggling with these two subjects, I've tried my best to simplify them with all your PYQs and images that are there. So this series is only to do with images, but all your MCQs have been taken care of earlier. So you can always get to the platform, you can get to the app, you can view these, they are still available for you to view, and you can download the PDFs and probably see it at a faster speed because we have less time that is left now. Apart from that, another update, there's also going to be a mock test which I'm going to conduct over the Telegram group on December 3rd. So I'm looking forward, and it's not a time bound test. I'll upload it at night on 3rd of December. But you guys can, obviously the link will be open, so you can view it and attempt it even on the same day or the next day. So there's no hurry as such, but yeah, just as an update, closer to the exam, I'll be uploading these mock tests over Telegram. Also, the PDF of this session and all the future sessions I'll be putting up on Telegram, both my Telegram group as well as the Unacademy Telegram group. So whichever group you're a part of, you can download it from there. Thank you so much guys for joining in. Now see you tomorrow, same time between 9 and 9:30. I'll put up a video on the YouTube channel and you can go through the same. Thank you so much. All the very best. Study well. Give it your best shot. Few days remaining, and I know all of you have been struggling literally and working very hard. So don't let the last few days get wasted. I know anxiety will kick in like always, and it happens with everyone. But yes, consistency is the key out here. Whosoever just manages to continue studying at this point of time is definitely going to get through the exam. All the best. Study well.